Hey everybody, chapter 13, lesson 3, and what we're going to talk about here today is a new Red Scare shaping Cold War tensions, shaping American society, and that new Red Scare is going to lead us to really what amounts to a real fear of subversion. This idea that there are spies among us. Americans, and throughout this lesson, you're going to see me refer to this image, are going to be constantly asking themselves, who are the Reds? Who are the people among us that are the commies? Who are the ones that are going to subvert our government? It all starts way back in 1945. Truman is president, but he hasn't been president very long, only about 6 or 7 months. And a guy named Igor Gouzenko, he defects with 109 documents that show without a doubt that the Soviets have been spying on Canada, on America, on the West in general, and that they're after our secrets, particularly our atomic secrets. This reveal begins to spread a real fear of subversion, that somehow there are communists in our government and somehow these people are going to make our government communist, that they will overthrow it. That's the real key here, is to understand that subversion is not just about spying, it's about actually overthrowing the government, that somehow you can make America communist because of spies present doing work inside our own government. Again, this question will come up. Who are the Reds? Are they in our government? Are they trying to overthrow it? President Truman is going to do something here to try and figure out if there are spies trying to subvert our government. He's going to try a loyalty review program. The concept is pretty simple. You interview everyone. You interview their friends, their families. Somebody works for our government, they get interviewed. Top to bottom, what do you believe? What do you think? What are you doing? Why do you do it? And then through this persistent interviewing, you begin to catch mistakes. They say one thing one day, they say something else a second day. A friend says one thing, another friend says a different thing. And you begin to piece together and find out who might be a spy and who might not be a spy. This is designed to try and put the American people, have some confidence still. But it's not what happens, unbelievably. What happens instead is that Truman's loyalty review program discovers, like, let's say we have here in front of us 20 different workers in the United States government. And the loyalty review program discovers that one, maybe that one, are actually spies. Well, so what? Right? We caught the spies. But the thing that makes Americans question and fear who are the Reds is that if we caught those two, how many more are there? What if this guy is a spy too and we didn't catch him? And this guy? What if my wife is a spy for the commies? What if my kids are spies for the commies? That's the question that begin to really kind of sit and sink in amongst the people in America. This question of who's a spy and who's not a spy. So, the loyalty review program, instead of calming fears, fails to calm them and leaves people more than ever before asking, who are the Reds? So what we'll see here in terms of this is this endless quest for proof. Who are they? What do they want? So this incredible search for the Reds, right? Who are the Reds? It's going to continue to build and build and build, almost like a snowball heading down a hill, turning into an avalanche. And the federal government, revealing some spies with its loyalty review board, is going to continue to search for them. It's going to do all kinds of things. The House of Representatives will investigate. The FBI is going to wiretap groups and individuals. You're going to see even Hollywood investigated. You're going to see people looking for spies under every rock, behind every door. And what happens when you start looking for something, you're going to find something. Even if it's not 100% guaranteed, if you think something's going wrong and you keep looking hard enough, you'll find stuff that kind of makes you think, well, maybe it is going wrong. So here are some of the things that we find as we're kind of investigating our society. And it's one of the ways really that the Cold War shapes our society, is this constant need to search out and look for and investigate communism in our society. One of the ways that we end up doing that is with the discoveries of different spies. One of them is prosecuted by this guy right here. This is Richard Nixon. when he was just a lawyer for the American government. Richard Nixon prosecuted a guy named Alger Hiss. He was the first major conviction that we ever had in terms of a communist spy amongst us. Now, people didn't know for sure that Alger Hiss was guilty. He was convicted not of spying, not of treason, nothing like that. He was convicted of perjury. The thought was that he lied under oath. So they convicted him for perjury, they put him away in jail, and it wasn't until years and years and years later that we discovered the truth about him. And I'll explain why that is in just a second, because I want to spend a little more time here mentioning this second group of spies that we discover, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. You can see them right there. They were accused of actually spying for the Soviets and smuggling nuclear secrets out to the Soviets in Moscow. They were actually convicted as spies, sentenced to death, put in the electric chair. Well, how did we find these guys, right? The Loyalty Review Program, we'll find some of them, but there's something else, actually, that helps us find Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs. And the American public didn't know about it not until the 1980s. It wasn't declassified even in completely until the 1990s, and it was called Project Venona. And the idea was to break the Soviet encryption codes, so that when you would send a message from here in the West over to the East, you would see us intercept it and be able to decode it. That was the idea. Let's crack their Soviet code. And what we end up finding are documents like this one that I'm blowing up here on the screen from March of 1945, before the war is even over. As a result of, and you can see it right here, as a result of a chat with Ailes, the following has been ascertained. Ailes has been working with the neighbors continuously since 1935. Well, that gives us one hint here. We have to look for someone that started with our government since 1935. For some years, he's been leader of a small group of neighbors, probationers, for the most part consisting of his relations. So he's got to have some relatives of some sort. The group and Ailes himself work on obtaining military information only. Materials on the bank allegedly interest the neighbors very little, and he doesn't produce them regularly. All the last few years, Ailes has been working with Paul, who also meets other members of this group occasionally. Recently, his whole group was awarded Soviet decorations. And now look, here's the one that really helps us. After the Yalta Conference, when he'd gone to Moscow, a Soviet personage in a very responsible position, Ailes gave to understand that it was Comrade Vyshinsky, allegedly got in touch with Ailes, and at the behest of the military neighbors, passed on to him their gratitude and so on. So when you put all these pieces of the puzzle, here's what we discover. We discover that the neighbors are the Soviet intelligence unit, called the GRU at the time. We discover that the bank is the State Department. We discover that this person, Ailes, does have relations, brothers, sisters, all who have access to important information. That leads us to wonder, well, who's Ailes? If we look at the travel of all the State Department officials who went to Moscow after the Yalta Conference, one name appears, and it's a man with relatives and a man who was rumored to spy for the Soviets, Alger Hiss. Now, he denied it to his death, but the evidence is pretty clear. Alger Hiss, definitely a spy, and Project Venona to thank. So again, as this kind of builds, this finding spies, America continues to ask, who are the Reds? So all of this doubt and questioning reaches fever pitch. This who are the Reds, this need to know, reaches fever pitch when two things happen. One of them is right up here. Congress passes what's called the McCarran Act, or the Internal Security Act, and it does a whole number of things, and what it really does is make people even more paranoid, because it says that if you are a communist, or if we suspect that you're a communist, you are banned from having a passport, you can't go anywhere, and you can be arrested in case of national emergency. So what's the big deal, you say? Why does that create paranoia? Because our government, including the army, begin to build concentration camp prisons around the country in the South and in the Midwest for subversives, political opponents. People who thought the Red Scare, this fear of who are the Reds, was kind of crazy and out there, really started to panic at this idea of us building these camps. We had just seen internment camps during World War II, and we know that one of the first things that a fascist country did, like Italy and like Nazi Germany would later do, and even the Soviets themselves would do, was to build camps like this for political opponents, people that we disagreed with. So when we see that you can arrest people that might be communist, you can ban communist groups, you can make revolution illegal, all of these kinds of things, Americans really begin to go after communists with a fever pitch. They want someone to lead them. They need someone to lead them. We have all of these people that are worried about it, but there's no one that's really kind of directing that energy. Lots of people out there saying it's better dead than red, but no one really directing that anxiety in the 1950s until this guy shows up. Senator Joseph McCarthy. He gave a speech in 1950, and really it wasn't anything like a magical speech. It was just a little speech that he gives to some old ladies, literally. And in that speech, he says that he knows, and you can see an example of the speech right here. You can see a quote of it. He says that he knows, and he had in his hand, and he held up a stack of papers, a list of 205 people in the State Department, the people that work with other countries, that are, in fact, communist. And he makes that speech again and again and again. Funny thing though, the number of people that he knows for sure that are communist, it changes. Sometimes it's 57, sometimes it's 109, sometimes it's 205. The people who doubt all of this, like the people that worry about those concentration camps, the people who doubt all of this Red Scare stuff, they're kind of wondering if McCarthy isn't full of it. And by it, I don't mean Jell-O. You know what I mean. So they watching this kind of thing unfold, McCarthy making all of these accusations, and he really starts to make some wild accusations. And the American people love him for it. They rally behind him as he is making accusations about Secretary of State Dean Acheson, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall, and these people are World War II heroes. These aren't just average everyday Americans, politicians, or soldiers. These people are like bona fide heroes, okay? But when McCarthy comes along, he makes these vague charges. He hurts people's reputation. It actually gets a nickname because it happens so often in the 1950s. It's called McCarthyism. He even goes on TV. His panel in the House of Representatives goes on TV, and they actually hold hearings, televised live, where he accuses important people in Hollywood, in politics, in the army, in the government, of being communist. He gets so aggressive and so angry that people actually begin to turn against him. They begin to realize that this guy he's a bully. He even goes after a young kid just out of college who didn't really have any connections at all. And when that comes to light, Americans kind of wake up a little bit. They go, wait a minute, this guy is leading us down this path. I'm not sure this is the path we want to go down. And at this moment, the Red Scare, the Cold War, takes a bit of a turn. It's not so much about finding out who are the Reds, but recognizing that our society's changed now, that there's something different about who we are, that we have to deal with communism, that our society's changing. The change that our society goes through during this time is really based on fear. Fear is what led us to prosecute people with McCarthyism. It's what led us to not trust the loyalty review program. It's why we created Project Venona. Fear is going to be a part of our society. Fear of communism, fear of the Soviet Union, fear of the Reds. It's going to be a part of our society up until the 1990s. We're going to see this fear emerge in different ways over the course of the next several chapters. During the 1950s, the two ways we really see it emerge, especially strong, are when the Soviets drop the hydrogen bomb in 1953. This really worries us because we had invented it only a year earlier. Do the math. The Soviets detonated their first atomic bomb in 1949. We had detonated ours on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. So it took them 4 years to build that atomic bomb. 4 years. But they're able to build a hydrogen bomb in only 1 year after we discover it. This makes Americans increasingly anxious about the possibility of nuclear war with the Soviets. And it's a fear that our politicians will use again and again and again and again, whether it's Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Johnson, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush 1. They will all use this fear to get what they're looking for out of the American people and our government. So we see people begin to prepare for these attacks. We're going to see things like duck and cover. We're going to realize that we're going to have bomb shelters in our yards and in our schools. And this fear and this worry is going to emerge in our culture in different ways. We're going to see movies about commies from things like James Bond, whose entire book history and most of his movie history up until the 1990s was fighting the Soviets. You're going to see plays, television, even movies in the 80s after Bond is no longer what he was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, like Rocky IV. We're going to see Cold War in our music, whether it's songs like Leningrad or Back to the USSR and other really popular songs that artists will put out for decades. This is going to be a central part of our popular culture as we consume more and more and more of it. It's a way of expressing our fear. I think the other really interesting thing about this, these worries about nuclear war, these worries about kind of radioactive fallout and Armageddon and the end of everything, and we actually see it for the first time. Its first inkling, I know it really explodes in the 1950s, but its first inkling is actually in 1946. A nonfiction book is published. It's a guy named John Hersey. He publishes a book called Hiroshima. And what it does is it shows in firsthand accounts, testimony of survivors, what nuclear war is really like. And it makes us as Americans question, should we even drop that bomb? Remember, once Truman drops it, right, he sacrifices that. You can't put that back in the bag. And now Americans are paying for it. So we'll talk about this and all these other issues in more detail in class, and we've got a couple of different activities planned for it as well.